Hello. Thanks very much for joining this live stream technique tips. Um, the reason I thought it would be nice to do this is that people often like online classes for things like aerobics and working out. And of course, on the guitar, that is precisely what we're doing. We are kind of like athletes. Our fingers and hands work have to work in that way. And so this will hopefully be the first of a number of live stream classes, a kind of regular slot, not quite weekly, but maybe once every 2 weeks. And it's going to be really important for me to read your comments, what you have to suggest, read you know in terms of what you'd like me to cover, perhaps. Um, Also, just to get other people's suggestions when it comes to solving technical problems, because the more heads we can bash together, the better. Um, so in this class, I'd like to start by thinking about how we approach guitar technique. I mean, instrumental technique, but obviously we're dealing specifically with guitar technique here. Um, the first thing I'd like to address is this false dichotomy, which is often imposed on the whole technique versus musicality question. Um, so you'll often hear people saying such and such a guitarist is he's a very technical player, but not very musical, or he is a very musical player, great ideas, but it's a bit rough around the edges. I mean, there's a certain amount of truth to that sometimes, but the thing about technique is that it's a vehicle to make music. It's not there for its own glory. It's to enable us to bring the music to life, uh, to be able not just to play the correct notes, but to play with good phrasing and to play with lots of variety, to try and bring out everything that there is in the music, everything that we want to bring out. So you might think of it like this: if you get a player who makes no mistakes in the sense of doesn't play any wrong notes, but it's really flat and dry. And then you get another player who makes a number of mistakes, but it's extremely musical with great phrasing, using the various colors of the instrument, variety of vibrato, and he's really able to bring the music to life. Well, many people would be mistaken in thinking the dry player had the good technique, the musical player, his technique wasn't as good, but he was really musical. I would dispute that. I think that the very fact that someone is able to make the instrument speak and make the music speak with good phrasing, well, that all requires technique. I mean, even if you play a crescendo, that there's a a series of physical actions need to be performed in order to make the crescendo. It doesn't happen itself. So in some ways, playing perfectly with no mistakes doesn't perhaps require as much technique as we might think, but playing very musically with good phrasing and the like, and dynamic control, that really does take a lot of technique. So that's the first thing I'd like to address. I think in these classes, it's really important that we're thinking about how to make music, not how to uh, make notes for their own sake. The next thing I'd like to address is the notion of good technique and bad technique. There was quite a well-known musician recently made a video, and he made a series of claims along the lines of there's no such thing as good and bad music and the like, and that's another discussion. But he also said no such thing as good and bad technique, and I would certainly in this class disagree with that with that with that assertion. I could see where he was coming from. He was trying to make sure people were not discouraged. However, the generally the only people who can say there's no such thing as good technique and bad technique are the geniuses. Who there's very few geniuses for whom everything just seems to kind of work and develop correctly. They're few and far between. But I mean, the history of music does seem to have, there seems to be people like that to some extent. And then at the other end, lots and lots of people who can't really play very well. Maybe they've got into a mentality of thinking that if they formalize a technique, they're going to somehow diminish their individual expression, for example. And that's a terrible limitation, self-imposed limitation to get sort of to be trapped by. So we do have to, I think, acknowledge that there's good and bad technique. Of course, the other part of that is that there are lots of people who could play really well and now can't play at all because of an injury, which came about due to some imperfection in their technique. So there is good technique and there's bad technique. Now, of course, I mean, the other side of that is that there are technical solutions that work better for some people than they do for others. We've all got different hands. We've all got different sort of, mental strengths, as it were. People often talk about memorization, for example, as being, some people memorize mainly visually, some people orally, and the like. I mean, all these things are taken into consideration. And on that note, the main thing I want to look at in this class is precisely the question of finding the approach that works for you. Now, you're not going to go away from this live stream or your video if you watch it later, knowing what that is. It's going to take quite a lot of time. I'm still working it out for myself to some extent, and I've been playing guitar for quite a long time with very good teachers guiding my technical development. So the first thing I want to look at is the question of a technical routine. So a lot of people will say that they practice an hour of technique a day, or maybe more, or maybe less, but they've got some kind of routine that they follow to keep themselves in shape, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you think about other walks of life, certainly in sports, the idea of a kind of workout routine which keeps the right muscles strong and keeps a kind of balance, a muscular balance, can obviously be applied to a musical instrument. And if you are constructing a routine, if you are looking at how to make a technical routine, you have to be very, very clear that on the difference between a technical routine and a warm-up routine. A lot of people will come at technical exercises and almost think of them as being synonymous with warming up, getting the fingers warmed up to play. But the two are actually quite different things. So, for example, if someone was about to give a concert, they don't at that point, 20 minutes before going on stage or however long they need to warm up, they don't at that point think that I'm going to do a full technical routine. I'm going to address this weakness in my playing. I'm going to address my slightly dodgy 3/4 slurs, or I'm going to address some, my right hand arpeggios. I think 20 minutes before a concert, that would be insane. You're going to find all of these imperfections in your technique. I mean, you knew they were there already, but they're going to be at the forefront of your mind, and it's going to really mess with your ability to give a good, confident performance. But what someone in that situation will want to do is get their fingers warmed up, so they're ready to play. And there are many technical exercises that can be used for both. So you might practice some slurs, for example, like this. And so on. Now, you might practice that as part of a routine in which you're trying to improve your slur technique. And so that's really good. But you might also be using an exercise like that simply to warm the hands up. And so it might be the same exercise, but there's a very different intention. There's a very different end that you're trying to achieve there. And it's really important when you're practicing any technical exercise that you know what you have a purpose, but behind practicing that thing. If you're using it to warm up the hands, you want to be careful that you're not pushing yourself too hard. That it's not a question of trying to say build muscle, which is something that slurs are often used for in the left hand, building up stamina and the like. Obviously, 20 minutes before a concert, well, you've got in that concert you're going to have whatever stamina you've got at the beginning of the day. You're not going to be able to build any more. So the other thing you don't want to do is maybe you're trying to push yourself over a certain speed, upper limit that you've reached. Well, that's not the time to do that either, because when we practice fast, we often practice imperfectly, or we perform the actions imperfectly, lacking in accuracy, and that's just a really bad way to kind of set off for a concert, or even practicing on your own, practicing pieces on your own. So you want to make sure that it's extremely accurate. I mean, that goes for 99% of technical practice as well. But in technical practice, you are trying to push yourself sometimes. You're not trying to do that when you're warming up. So just to recap on what I've covered already, the first thing was try and get over the false dichotomy of technique versus musicality. That's completely false. Good musicality can only come through with good technique. The technique is there to bring the music out. You might be a very musical person, but without technique, you won't be able to play musically. You won't be able to do what is physically required of you to make music, to play musically with crescendos and all the rest, because every idea it has to be realized physically on a musical instrument. So technique versus musicality, throw it out the window. If you're a very musical person, don't limit your technique by hiding behind the idea that, well, I'm really musical and I'm just a bit rough around the edges and so forth. No, you've got much more that you can give musically if you will develop your technique. And likewise, if you think you're a very good player technically, that you don't really make many mistakes, well, you need to push yourself as well. You need to be using that technique to play musically. So get rid of that false dichotomy, and then try and avoid fooling yourself into the idea that there's no such thing as good technique. That's a very dangerous idea in terms of injury avoidance, but it's also a way of being trapped. I've also heard, incidentally, as an aside, people saying, "I don't read music because I think that will inhibit my creativity." Of course, really, what you want to be thinking about there is, well, how much more creative might you be if you actually spoke the language as well? I mean, there are many very talented people around, and why limit yourself? So we get over that, and then we get onto the idea of a technical routine. And what we're doing in a technical routine is making the difference between a warm-up practice and technical development. They are quite distinct things with a lot of overlaps, a lot of the same exercises, but again used for a different purpose. On the technical routine, in terms of how long you want to spend on it, that's something that you'll need to experiment with and work out for yourself. I remember one person telling me that when I was much younger, that you should spend about an eighth of your time, of your practice time, on technique. I've tended to spend a bit more than that. I think I've got quite naturally weak hands, and so I found it quite useful to spend a little bit more time than that on technical exercises. At the other end of things, I've heard of players who don't practice any exercises. They just do technique from the pieces, which is something I'm going to get into in this class and show you some examples. It's something you should be doing anyway, regardless of whether you actually do follow a technical routine. And then, before I get into what should make up the technical routine, the last point to make is to avoid getting stuck in a technical routine where you do the same exercises every day for years. Any personal trainer will tell you to avoid that. They might give you a workout routine for a month, and then they'll want to tweak it slightly, and that's really important for the health of the muscles. Workout routines definitely not my speciality, but I do know from speaking to people in that field that is the case, and also people who deal with muscular injuries that there is a thing we all know of called repetitive strain injury, and we do want to avoid that. So trying to keep your routines fresh is very important. And what I'm going to do now is try and give you an outline of that routine. And I'm just going to, at the moment, have a quick look at the comments. There's no comments, so that's all right. Just to see if make sure that people can actually hear me. There's nobody writing in the comments, so we need to hear you. So a technical routine, you want to keep it fresh. You want to not just use the same exercises over and over again. But that, of course, brings me to what you should be working on in a technical routine. And I found over the years a very useful book is Kitharologus by Ricardo Isnaola. And I'm not saying that book has all the answers or that it is somehow... Oh, there is a comment now. Oh, great. Thanks. And so that book, Kitharologus, has been very, very useful to me because it actually provides routines. And what he does is he structures the book so that each level has a kind of order of things that you're working on. For example, slurs are covered. So in each level, the slurs get a bit more difficult. Same with right-hand arpeggios. Each level gets a little bit more difficult. And so if you've got pencil, paper at the moment, this would be quite a useful thing to note down. In the left hand, I would divide the basic things in the following way. You want to develop stretching this way. I call it vertical stretching. So it's the ability of the fingers to stretch across the 6 strings. So that's one, as it were, subheading, technique subheading, if you like. The next one would be, and this is not the order you necessarily should practice them in. Again, that's a thing you can work out. It's going to be different times. Sorry, I left my emails or something on. The next thing would be stretching across the fingerboard like this. So I call that horizontal stretching. The names are not important. You might think of it in an entirely different way, but it's, if you like, the kind of span of the hand. Very dangerous thing to work on but useful to some extent. So you've got vertical stretching like this, you've got horizontal stretching like this. The next thing in the left hand I would put into a heading would be position shifting. So the ability to move smoothly between positions. That's quite different from playing in this way. That's stretching. That is getting from one place to another across the fingerboard, but it's not really, you're not moving the arm to do it. And position shifting is really important. And then the next category would be slurs, hammer-ons and pull-offs. Great for building strength and stamina, accuracy. Really good. So that's kind of four headings. Maybe another one would be finger independence, working on the ability to move one finger and not another. So that's crucial as well. And an exercise for that would be something like this: putting all the fingers down on one string and then lifting one finger at a time without other fingers moving. So that's an example of finger independence. And in subsequent classes, I'll go into these categories in detail. So we'll have a class just looking at slurs, for example, and a class just looking at finger independence. But this is just to give you something to go on, exercises to find a way to structure a routine. So that, in a way, covers the left hand alone. There's also the question of what I would call basic placement of the fingers, and that can be kind of addressed in things like scales. And another category I found really important in recent years, but I neglected entirely before, is actually, it's the opposite of stretching like this. It's working on the muscles that pull the fingers together, and I've got a video on that on my channel. They're called adduction exercises, and it might be worth having a look at that video. And that's actually a really good foundational thing to work on before trying to improve your span across the fingerboard, to make sure that the muscles that pull the hand together are strong, because they get really neglected, but they can't really be overused, unlike the ones that are used when you spread the fingers. They can be overused and can lead to quite serious injury. Getting onto the right hand, I would put it like this. I think you've got arpeggios, so playing across the strings, and then you've got playing on the string. So that's plucking, picado, as the flamenco players would call it. So playing across the string, arpeggios, picado. Then you've got something like tremolo, where you're using more fingers than just two. Of course, picado scales can be practiced in that way as well. Then a really important thing in the right hand is to practice the extensor muscles. So rasguedo is really important in the right hand. That sort of thing. Flamenco players do it all the time, and that's, a lot of people think that's why they can play such fast scales. Even though you're not doing that to play scales, you're playing the normal way. Because they've got strong extensor muscles, they can reset the finger really quickly. It's like I often say to students, it's like you don't want to be a crocodile guitarist. Crocodiles sit with their mouth slightly open, so they can catch their prey, because they can't really open the mouth quickly enough. They can close it really fast, but they can't open it quickly enough. And classical guitarists or non-flamenco guitarists, any fingerstyle guitarists that are not flamenco guitarists, can fall into the trap of having poorly developed extensor muscles. There's also the question of whether to work on the pinky. I think you should practice that in the context of rasguedos and also picking, even though you might not actually use it in the end. So that kind of covers left hand, right hand, and then putting hands together. Scales are really good. The question of synchronization is really important. And I'm just going to look at the next. Great. Really good question there about rest stroke or free stroke for beginners. It depends. I generally teach free stroke for a start, although I'm a big advocate of using rest stroke, which is unpopular in certain circles. There was a certain generation that became of age in the 1980s, 90s that kind of turned against apoyando rest stroke. I'm definitely not in that school, but I do find developing free stroke is good for a start. Nevertheless, I've actually you might hear the odd noise. My son is actually in the room, sitting there, and with him, I found he took to rest stroke so naturally that I've just gone with it. So provided they're being practiced well, with a good hand position, pushing the string, avoiding pulling up, and avoiding playing from here, from this kind of middle knuckle, I think either option is good, depending on the student. So that's the question of a technical routine. And certainly, as I said, over the next few classes, I will be covering various exercises in those categories. Hopefully, you're able to note them down. I might leave a note, make a note about that in the comment section afterwards when the video is uploaded, and you can always, of course, watch the playback and go over it again. What I would like to look at, though, is it's another approach to working on technique from the routine-based approach. Now, the routine-based approach has a lot of strengths. It's difficult for a lot of people to find the time and the discipline. If you've got limited time to practice and you've got pieces you want to learn, spending a lot of time on a routine beyond warming up can be, maybe even impossible. The other weakness it has is that there is the tendency to fall back into the exercises we've already learned and are comfortable with, and we fall into that kind of repetitive thing, with risks of repetitive strain injury and the like. So there are weaknesses there to the routine approach. So there are other approaches to practice and staying on top of technique. I just very quickly mention the pianist Shura Cherkassky, one of my favorite players. People thought of him as the last romantic. He lived a bit longer than Horowitz, and he played in very much in that style. He was a very spontaneous player, and perhaps that's why he practiced the way he did. He practiced exactly 4 hours a day with a timer. Once he got to 4 hours, he stopped, and he only practiced by playing through his pieces at exactly half tempo. And in fact, a recording engineer told me that they were recording. He was making a studio recording of Liszt's B minor sonata, which is pretty much exactly half an hour in length. And he said he wanted to warm up for the recording, and if the guy could come back with some food or something. And the guy knew how he practiced, and he knew just to come back in exactly 1 hour, 60 minutes. And sure enough, when he returned, he was just on the final bars, half speed of the Liszt B minor sonata. That's a really good way to practice, really good way for technique, because you tend to play very accurately when you're at half tempo. And I always think if you need to practice and you can't quite find the mental energy to practice in another way, or do a routine, then simply playing through very, very carefully at an extremely slow tempo can be quite effective. Another player, I forget who, and actually forget which instrument. I think he was a flautist. Someone told me. would practice in a way so that he never ever made a mistake. So that way he never learned mistakes. So he would practice the piece really, really slowly, much slower than half tempo if necessary, but whatever tempo it took to be able to play it with no mistakes. And then he would be speeding up something that was perfect. So those are some other approaches. However, the really interesting approach for a class like this is to take difficult passages in your pieces and practice them in a way which allows you to improve technically as a player. And I'm going to give you some examples of that now. So here, I'll show you the full version. Are some excerpts which we're going to look at. We're going to look at the first one for a start. Apologies that these are some pieces I've been working on, and I thought they made quite good examples. But the excerpts from Milano are in lute tuning. You can play them in standard tuning as well, but the fingering won't quite work. So if you're able to play with the G string tuned to F sharp, then you could try that now. If not, then just play it in standard tuning. So I'm going to look at the first excerpt, bars 1 and 2 from this fantasy. I don't know. Hopefully, in full screen, you'll still be able to make a bit of that. So we've got this. In some ways, quite a simple little line of music, but there's a tricky position shift there. If you look at the second bar, we have an A played with the first finger, going down to a G sharp played with the third finger. And if we do it another way, if we play 1-1, it's then a little bit clunky and non-legato, staccato, getting on to this octave, which we need to get onto on beat 3. So we've got this awkward position shift. Now, if you practice that in a careful way, firstly, isolate the position shift completely. So 1 to 3, and just practice the shift itself. Now, immediately we come into the problems which we run into when making position shifts. The first thing is a tension here in this part of the arm. We tend to tense up when shifting. So we can work on that. We can make sure that we stay absolutely relaxed in the upper arm. The next thing, of course, is the problem of staccato. Like that. We've got to make it as legato as possible. And we've got to do it without sliding, which is a bit messy and certainly not in the style of this piece. So we do have to jump. And then we have to work out how we can make it legato with no space, without tensing up, without a movement like this, which then results in an accent on the note you're shifting to as well. And that brings us to the technique of leading the shift with the arm, like this. And if I go back to just me, you'll be able to see that a bit more clearly. So we've got the note here in 5th position, the A with the first finger, and then the arm leads, and our third finger almost just falls on to the correct note. Now, if you practice that in isolation, making sure that you do lead with the arm, sometimes I suggest putting in an extra beat. So give a beat to the position shift, like this. Beat. And that's where you can move the arm. So you move the arm, beat. And that really allows you to get used to the feeling of of leading with the arm, which helps with shifts so much. And once you've got used to it, take that beat out and go back into tempo, and try and get it as legato and relaxed as possible. And once you've got that, you can then start to add some more of the piece to put it in context, because of what you do before the shift and what you do after does kind of alter its execution to some extent, even if it's just the fact that mentally you're focused on so many things. So slotting it back into context is really useful. Now, what the other thing about this way of practice is that you can derive a technical exercise, like a more developed technical exercise, from the difficult passage. So rather than just practicing that, we could make an exercise like this. We can repeat on each string many times. The bass strings are quite useful because you have the squeak to avoid, and if you're squeaking, it means you're sliding in some way. So that's an exercise that you can make from the passage. If you still have difficulty, or you want to somehow marry the two ideas of a technical routine and this kind of practice, and by the way, I think you should do this kind of practice anyway, regardless of whether you do a technical routine. I'm going to answer that in a minute. That's a really good question. But regardless of whether you do a technique, you should practice like this. Very useful. But you can find an exercise on shifts that will give you a more generalized kind of workout for that. So if we get the music back up again, and I'll answer this really good question. Shifting from the elbow, or does the hand lead the movement? No, in this case, the arm leads the movement. I suppose you could think of it as the elbow. I wouldn't want to think of it as the elbow too much, because that would tend to make people do this. And that is, well, certainly for such a small shift, that's unnecessary. So I kind of think of it as the forearm leading the shift. It kind of looks like the hand is leading, but it's certainly the forearm I'm focused on. In any case, this next exercise that we're going to look at is going to address that. So here, below this kind of second line, we've got half a major scale, like this. Really good exercise. So again, we're working on shifting between 1 and 3, 3 and 1, which are the fingers that are being used in the passage. And if I show you myself again, I'll show you how that's played. So it's a kind of half a scale played on one string, first position, fifth position, then back to first position. So again, we can isolate the shift 3 to 1. Put a beat in. Arm, 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 arm. And then the same coming back. Don't worry if there's a very slight manipulation of the tuning, the intonation. It's getting a bit sharp. Don't worry about that for a start. The main thing is to get used to leading with the arm, and you can fix the tuning issue later. So that's where you make an exercise, find an exercise or make an exercise. It's often very good to find one, because the masters, as it were, have come up with some really good exercise, whether it is Naola or Pujol or Carlovar or whomever, and they've worked things out over many years. But you can make them up as well. But that's finding an exercise related to a difficult passage with a technical difficulty, and then isolating the difficulty within the technical exercise, and that gives you some more more generalized approach, maybe more applicable in other cases and other passages of other pieces. And then the other thing, of course, is that you can construct a routine with exercises related to the difficult passages in the repertoire that you're playing. So you come up with your half-hour or 40-minute or 50-minute technical routine, depending on how much practice you manage to do in a day. And you've actually found exercises that somehow relate to the music you're playing. So that's in some ways the best of both worlds. It still requires the discipline of kind of sitting down to a technical routine, obviously regular breaks, but still a technical routine. But again, you can find the way that works for you in terms of how you put that together. Anyway, let's look at the next the next passage. So just a few bars later, we've got. So I played that wrong. Sorry. So if we look at the second bar there, we have this. Sorry, you need to see me. So you see the 3-1 happening whilst 4 and 2 are stationary. Now, by simply practicing that bar, you have a really good finger independence workout. Really useful by itself without doing anything else. That's a really good workout. If you do want to make an exercise from it, there's the one I mentioned before, but focus now on keeping 2 and 4 in one place, and 1 can be on or off. It depends. Maybe practice both ways, and then lifting 3. You could then take 1 off, and you could go 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, like that. And then, of course, the next thing you should think, well, from that, I've got a very good general technical exercise. I can now keep 3, 1 stationary and lift 4, 2. Like that. So now, not directly related to the piece, the 4, 2 is not necessary for in that particular bar. To be honest, in that piece, it is necessary. In other places, there's a lot. Playing polyphonic music requires a lot of finger independence. But, and then we can keep 2 and 3 stationary, 1 and 4 and 1. We can keep 1 and 2 stationary, 3 and 4. That's actually a little bit easier. Keep 3 and 4 stationary, 2 and 1. Keep 4 and 1 stationary, 3 and 2. So there you have a finger independence exercise, pretty much made up on the spot, taken from a passage that you're working on in your repertoire. There's an extra difficulty in the passage, which is that 4 and 2 are on strings. Fingers 4 and 2 are on strings 1 and 4. So there's a little bit of a stretch, what we might call the vertical stretching. So you can then incorporate that into your technical exercise. So we put 4 and 2 like that. We can do any part of the guitar, and then take that principle. We can then swap 4 and 2 round. So we're still going to have 4 and 2 stationary, but the other way around. Now finger 2 is on the first string and finger 4 is on the 4th string. And we go 3, 1, 3, 1. And you can follow that with the other combinations that I listed a moment ago when playing on the string. You can develop it further by making 4 and 2, having them a kind of fret apart instead of they were actually on consecutive frets before, now a fret apart, and do the same exercise. Swap round, still a fret apart. So you are incorporating a little bit of what I called horizontal stretching into the into the exercises that you are deriving from one bar of a piece. And all of that is going to help you play that passage, and all of it is going to help you develop generally as a player, develop technically as a player. And the last passage I've got, can tune the string back up now. And in this piece it's actually drop D, but we don't need it for this passage. We've got this passage from the Allegro of Bach's Prelude, Fugue and Allegro. Now you've got the jump of we've got another comment. I'm not quite sure what that last word means. But anyway, we've got the jumping 3, 4, and immediately looking at that passage, I think of the famous left-hand walking exercise that you find in places like pumping nylon, like this. Now, a lot of us tend to practice that exercise with the first finger a lot, and often we don't need to quite as much. The first finger is already quite strong. The third finger is pretty weak with stuff like that. But that's what is required in this passage. Whilst other stuff is going on, this 3-3 jump. So practicing the walking exercise is really important, and I'm going to show you how to do it. But oh yeah, looking to learn to read music properly. Yeah, that's was really great that you want to do that. It's incredibly useful, and you'll only find it beneficial. Yeah. Maybe that's something you could write to me about directly. Feel free to send me a private message. You can. My email address is usually on my videos or through my website, and I can guide you in the right direction with that. The reason I'm not going to answer it now is because it really depends where you're coming from as a player, how advanced you are as a guitarist in relation to your sight reading, whether you've played other instruments, things like that, personal to you and particular to you, that will determine how I answer that question. But it's great that you want to do it, and it's really not as hard or as it seems daunting, but it's not as hard as you think. But back to this, the walking exercise. So if we want to practice that effectively, for those of you who don't know it, we'll do it with the first finger for a start. You simply walk across the strings with one finger. And what you need to be very aware of is that you don't move the arm like this. As soon as you start moving the arm like this, you're getting out of position. And when you have a left hand walking in a passage like this, well, if you're doing all that kind of stuff, it's going to be very hard to play the other notes. It's inefficient and clunky. So using a simple exercise, something I haven't mentioned actually, is the importance of keeping exercises quite simple and doing them well. But this simple exercise done well can really help with that. So you avoid this. So this is happening to the finger. Your hand is kind of moving as little as possible, but you're demanding quite a lot of flexibility of the finger, and that's what I would call vertical stretching. Stretch, and then with with extension, there's always contraction as well. Stretching is both of those things combined. And then do it with the other fingers, obviously, and so on. I won't do all of that just now. Third finger is the one you need to do for this particular passage. But the really important thing is that you practice it legato. A lot of people with this exercise go like this. They go, they're really fast, and the notes are really staccato. That's not going to help you in real time, as it were, when something like that comes up in a piece, because what you're doing there is playing fast and moving slow. You need the movement to be fast, and for that you've got to slow the tempo down. So much more effective to practice like this, with as little space between the notes as possible, which can only happen if the movement from string to string is really fast. So that's a walking exercise that you can practice. Comes up in this piece. If I were struggling with that, actually I usually do struggle with that bar. That's why I picked it. It's one that you need to practice. At least I need to practice. I might incorporate some left-hand walking into my routine. Once you've got the legato thing going well, you can use different rhythmic variations. And that's to start to get into a place where you can keep the movement fast at a fast speed. But doing them all fast is often it's faster than you can think it through. So by using a dotted rhythm, as it were, only half of the notes are played at a fast tempo, and that gives you thinking time, and it can mean that you could be more, or it's easier to make sure the actual movement itself is fast. So that's left-hand walking derived from a bar from the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro by Bach, the Allegro of the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro. I mean, in that passage, there are lots of other difficult things, obviously. There's a kind of this thing that you need to do in pieces. And I find this is the kind of technical thing that almost can't be incorporated into a routine and can only be developed when you're practicing in a very careful way the passages in your pieces, not just playing from beginning to end, but taking one bar, half a bar, 2 bars, depends on the context, isolating it, working out how you do it well. Once you're able to do it well, how many times can you do it well in a row? That's old school stuff, but it stood the test of time because it works, and people can get on a stage under pressure, feeling nervous, maybe even vomiting before the concert, and still deliver the goods because they've done that. But it will also mean that it will keep you as a player in shape. You'll find the easy bits of the piece get better if you're isolating and practicing thoroughly the difficult bits. So just to quickly go over that, some difficulties here would be this thing. You're trying to get the finger prepared, so you don't go big space. Doesn't sound smooth. Melody, keeping the melody legato is important. So even after we've released the first finger to make way for the third, keep the fourth finger on, and that will mean that the overall effect is legato. Quite a lot of stretching, quite a lot of intricate movement there. Stretch, prepare. It's much smoother. And only once you've been through that should you then, at that concert tempo, do the repetition. So anyway, I hope going through that has been useful and will give you some ideas. Obviously, you're all going to be working on different pieces, different levels of repertoire, different pieces within each level of repertoire, huge amount of music out there. And the interesting thing, I think, for everyone watching this now will be to get to the practice room, whether you're working on book one of the Guitarist's Way, or whether you're preparing for a diploma or preparing for a recital, or your next lesson, whatever it is you're working on at any level. The interesting thing is going to be taking the bits you find difficult in your pieces and practicing them in a thorough way, thinking of what is difficult about it, what area of technique. Those categories I listed for a technical routine, they're really useful here, because I can think, is it a problem of position shifting? Is it a problem of being able to stretch enough this way? Is it a problem of just stamina? Maybe you need to do some slurs. Try and think about which category of technique the difficulty is in, and then practice that passage with that category in mind. So I'm working on a position shift, and then of course derive technical exercises from it. You can take it to your teachers as well. I mean, classes like this, the class I'm giving now and will continue to give regularly, they're not a replacement for having a one-to-one lesson, but neither is a class like this in conflict with a one. It's not like having two teachers. Take something like this, take a passage to your teacher. I know something's difficult. I'm not quite sure what it is. Could you help me find it? Could you show me how to practice? Finding out how to practice, one of the main things you can learn from taking lessons. So anyway, I hope this first live stream is a bit of an experiment for me. Never done it before. I changed the link because I found some software which would allow me to share the screen whilst giving the live stream. So that's why I did that, and I think it will make a better video for you to come back to as well. But really look forward to seeing everybody again. Some really good comments there, and I know you've written a little bit more about reading music, but do message me privately, and I'll get back to you about that. Any other questions? I'm going to keep the video up. Hopefully, I can work out how to do that. Keep it on YouTube, and of course, you can leave the comments there, and I'll have a look every now and then and address anything that needs to be addressed. But until the next class, thanks very much for joining, and I'll see you next time.